All right, welcome back to another episode of the Wise Wealth Podcast with your hosts, Sean and Josh Humphreys, where our goal is to help you make smarter and more informed financial decisions so you can obviously stay on track and ultimately achieve your financial goals. So, as always, I like to point out that we live and operate in the Canadian context. And I think that's especially important for this episode because we're going to be focusing a lot on TFSAs, including probably a lot. I know this one is kind of new to me, but something that you probably haven't heard before, particularly when it comes to day trading in a TFSA. So, in this
Yeah, for
episode,
you, active do-it-yourself investors, you'll find this one interesting.
yeah, yeah. So in this episode, we're covering RSPs versus TFSAs. So, how to make a good decision when it comes to contributions. So, which one should I contribute to? And the rules around that. Day trading in your TFSA. It's a cool court case that took place that set some unfortunate precedent on that. I mean, unfortunate depending on your view of things. The successor holder versus beneficiary in your TFSA designation there. And then lastly, and this is obviously a pretty common theme in our videos, we're going to talk a little bit about the retirement transition, why so many retirees struggle with that, not just financially, but more behaviorally, and how to prepare beyond just the financial side. So I guess we can just jump right in, Sean. One of the most common questions we get, there's a common question with really every age, even when you get to retirement or people who are just starting out with their investing and saving journey, is with limited funds, how do you decide between contributing to an RSP and a TFSA?
Yeah, so when it comes to the priorities, really the first place to start is to kind of talk about the mechanics of an RSP contribution and a tax-free savings account contribution, so we can kind of compare the two. And then I know you're going to share some little bit of insights around some of the anomalies or how we can pivot. And I think that's the key point here is it depends on your financial circumstances, which one you're going to focus in on. But let's just talk about this tax neutral aspect of the two accounts. So give you an example. Let's say that I've got, $5,000 of employment income, and I'm trying to figure out whether to add it to my tax-free savings account or my RSP account. And let's for a minute say that I'm at a marginal tax rate of 40%. So what we know is if I decide to put the money into my tax-free savings account, I'm foregoing the tax deduction I'm going to get on an RSP contribution. So if I take my $5,000, I'm going to have to pay tax on that $5,000. I'm going to net $3,000 after tax, and I can push that money into my TFSA. And then I'll have that money grow over the years, and it's going to compound. And, let's say that I get a 5% rate of growth on that asset. Then over a 20-year period, it's going to grow to $7,960. Okay, so I didn't have as much money at the front end because I had to pay tax. Then I put the money in the tax-free savings account. It grows tax-free over that time period. Now, my other option is I could take that $5,000. I can get a tax deduction. It's not taxable income to me. All $5,000 gets pushed into the RSP account in my example. And now all $5,000 is compounding on a tax-deferred basis over the same 20-year period. So at the end of that 20-year period, I'm going to have $13,266 in my RSP account. Sounds awesome, but I have to pay tax on that account balance when I pull the money out. Again, let's assume that I'm still at the 40% marginal tax rate. That means my after-tax value coming out of the account is $7,960, exactly the same dollar amount as what my tax-free savings account compounded out at. So on the surface, you'd kind of go, there's really no difference, but there can be very big differences depending on how your life is sort of framed in any given moment around marginal tax rates, future tax rates. I know, Josh, you've got maybe a couple of comments to make around that particular point.
Yeah, well, I think that highlights the tax neutrality of TFSAs and RSPs, assuming, right? This is assuming that the tax rate you put the money in your RSP and the tax rate you take it out will be the same. Now, the real question is that what you see when you talk to clients? Is the money, when they're funding their TFSA, is that the same tax rate that when they start pulling it out in retirement?
Well, yeah. So our experience is this, but you can't take our experience necessarily and apply it right across the board. But my experience has been, as I look back, most people are at a higher marginal tax rate when they're working and contributing and saving than the tax rate they're going to be at when they retire. That's been our experience. And that particularly became a fact, sort of a reality in 2009 when the Harper government brought in the pension income splitting rules, where you could begin splitting RIF income and pension income to a partner if you have a partner. So this is particularly beneficial for those of you that have a partner going into the retirement journey. So it was not uncommon at all to see people deducting at 40% or 35% and then pulling the money back out at 19, 20%. So clearly in that situation, it was beneficial to make the RSP contribution, not the TFSA. And I'll make a comment in a minute about maybe some exceptions to that rule in a second. But certainly, if you think your income is going to be higher, do the RSP first as a priority. For those of you that are contributing and think that your income is going to be fairly constant right through your career, then you need to really rethink the RSP idea because that gets hammered into our heads all the time, right? Sign up for group plans with your work. They have a group RSP. You're putting money in there. That's great. Hopefully your employer has a group TFSA. That's even better if you're at a relatively low tax bracket. I'm not sure if you have any comments to add to that, Chuck.
Oh, that's good. I think just to highlight, thinking ahead, thinking about your kind of your goals around the income you want in retirement, I think is super important with this.
Yeah, and I think that there are some small exceptions to this. You know, we've often commented that as you approach retirement, you do need to be a little bit nuanced in your buckets of money that you're sort of setting aside. And so just pounding away at a contribution that's tax deductible with an asset that's growing tax deferred, that's all good. That's building up an account value that will generate a long-term income when you retire. Awesome. And if there's a difference in tax brackets, higher when you work, lower when you retire, again, awesome. But there are going to be anomalies in cash flows. So when you retire, the things come up, unexpected expenses, maybe purchasing a new vehicle or trading in the old one, having to come up with money, having to help family members, health issues come up that require larger amounts of capital. And so we do encourage clients, if they can't do both, maybe you stop making as many contributions to your RSP account. You're now close to retirement. The value of the tax deduction and the value of the tax deferred compounding may not be as great for you. And maybe padding the account in the TFSA as another bucket of money you can get out tax effectively might be a wise idea. So again, you have to look at every client situation. It's unique, and having a few different buckets you can tap into sometimes is helpful.
It's awesome. All right. Let's move to day trading in a TFSA. So is it true that if you are day trading in your TFSA, meaning you're doing a high volume of trading, CRA might knock on your door and ask for some tax payable?
Yeah, I mean, they could actually look at the activity in your account and constitute it as a business and disallow the tax-free compounding within your account. So wouldn't that be a shock if you got an assessment notice and CRAs, beginning to look at your activities?
Little bait and
And
switch.
so what's that? Yeah. And so they're going to look at things like frequency of trading or transactions, the duration of the holdings, the intention to acquire securities for resale at a profit, the nature and the quantity of the securities, the time spent in the activities. So they're going to take a whole bunch of, looks at your account activity and then try to come up with, an assessment as to whether this is actually a traditional investment account where you're compounding money over time or whether it's really a business activity. What's interesting about this is that the same level of scrutiny doesn't take place with RSP accounts and RSP trading. So as long as you have a qualified investment within your RSP plan, you're not likely to get the same kind of scrutiny. But I know that you had done a little bit of research and you had come up with some interesting factoids around this matter.
Well, I just looked at the case, but I think it's important to point out you have to be trading at a pretty high volume for you. It's not like, oh, I'm gonna buy this stock or I'm gonna sell this stock and then buy this new one and then hold it for a while. And then it's not, there's no worries when it comes to that. I think it has to be pretty intentional, and there has
Yeah.
to be more like there's some details around what actually constitutes day trading. And I don't think anyone really would come near that unless they were intentionally day trading. You can't like stumble into it. But
I think the example you came across, he'd had some pretty phenomenal growth.
yeah. Well, this guy named Ahmed, he had built up. I think it was around I forget. I didn't actually write down the numbers, but I think it was like 17,000 in his TFSA. He built it up to over 600,000 in his TFSA over a period of around 3 years. But
Wow.
he was doing like high frequency trading, speculative penny stocks. And then the CRA argued that the activity amounted to carrying on a business inside the TFSA. And then because of that, the income in the TFSA generated was treated as taxable business income instead of a tax-free TFSA growth. And then the court ultimately agreed with CRA's position. So we ended up, I think that the section of the tax code was 146.2, meaning the TFSA's income is taxable. No,
Yeah. So it's kind
that's
of
not ideal.
yeah, and that obscure sort of story, but it's, part of what we try to do in this podcast is maybe come up with, some commentary that's not, typical kind of commentary. And this is an interesting one, but maybe we should all hire him as a portfolio manager for us.
Yeah,
Maybe
obviously he
that's,
was doing something wrong. Trading
yeah,
penny stocks is a high risk way of investing.
sometimes it works out.
Apparently. Yeah, yeah. All right. We could probably move on to number 3 here. TFSA successor holder versus beneficiary. So this is always confusing. I want to highlight something I was reading the other day, is just how poorly our registered accounts are named. Okay. So, I mean, this is kind of unrelated to the successor holder beneficiary, but it just
Yeah, yeah.
reminds me, like, there's so many terms. There was I forget the guy's name, it's really on LinkedIn. And for non-registered accounts, like how many names even advisors use to refer to a non-registered or cash account, or yeah, like there's like so many names. And then for people who are not well versed in the in finance, it's just like unbelievably confusing. Like even the name TFSA, tax-free savings account, we've had conversations with people who aren't from Canada. They have a TFSA and they just assume that they have to leave money in cash in their TFSA.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
And these are
Yeah.
not new to investing people. It's just named so poorly that they just assume it's a savings account.
Yeah, no, it's very true. In fact,
But yeah,
I saw a Canadian YouTuber in the financial arena, I think just released a video. I think trying to deal with that issue. Like he was taking all the different terminologies and saying,
yeah,
okay, in English, this is what this means, right?
yeah,
Because it's so true. It's confusing, and you got bureaucrats and technocrats coming up with phrases that are not helpful. But of course, that happens in almost every industry,
yeah,
accounting, law,
yeah,
everywhere, right? It's just a
yeah.
perennial problem.
I think you said for TFSA should be tax-free investment account.
Yeah.
RSP should be tax-deferred investment account. I could be getting those wrong, but like even something like that, it's just it makes way
No,
more
that's
sense.
exactly right. I mean, describe it what it is.
Yeah,
There's not ambiguity in terms of, what's going on with those accounts.
yeah. Anyway, so that was a bit of a tangent, but successor holder and beneficiary. What's People often get those confused. What's maybe elaborate on what the differences between those are with your TFSA?
Yeah, so I'll start with the fact that this caused a lot of issues. Tax-free savings accounts were first launched in 2009, and there was federal legislation around this, and then the provinces had to catch up. And so there's a flurry of activity trying to get a bit of alignment around how these accounts were registered and beneficiary designation, successor holder generation. And part of the problem is that the industry hadn't really caught up. And so people were walking into their financial institution and setting up tax-free savings accounts. And the person at the desk was saying, so who would you like to list as your beneficiary? And in that moment, not just the clients, but the institutions were not distinguishing between this concept of successor holder, which was a newer concept, and beneficiary. So you had a lot of early tax-free savings accounts, the spouse as a beneficiary. And seemed logical at the time, but they weren't realizing what they were doing. And it was actually a big mistake. And I'll talk about what the mistake is in a second here. The reason I bring this up right at the beginning is that there are likely still accounts out there where people back in 2009 set up their tax-free savings accounts, and they're just making the assumption that their partner is a successor holder. Or they're making the assumption that the partner is a beneficiary. They don't understand the difference between beneficiary and successor holder. I can give you with 100% assurance, you want your partner to be the successor holder, not a beneficiary when it comes to the tax-free savings account. So let's talk about the difference. So note to self, check your account agreement. How is the listing set up in your account? You may need to change it. because there's not necessarily a proactive mechanism for the institution to go back and check those original sign-offs on the documentation. So a beneficiary designation is, think of the tax-free savings accounts as separate accounts. If I have a partner, if I die, then if my partner is a beneficiary, that asset will be paid out to my partner, and it will be paid out free of the estate, not so subject to probate, and vice versa for my partner's account. Something happens to them. But it doesn't mean the money is going to go into my tax-free savings account. It just means it gets paid out to me directly upon their passing. Well, that's not what you want to have happen. What you want to have happen is that your spouse is a successor holder. So let's say that I have $180,000 in my tax-free savings account, and my partner has $180,000 in their tax-free savings account. If I die, all $180,000 of my tax-free savings account can go directly into my spouse's tax-free savings account. So now I have 180 times 2 compounding out at a tax-free basis. In a beneficiary designation, that 180 comes to me, but I have no ability to go put that money into the surviving partner, does not have the ability to put that money into a tax-free savings account.
You would need
They don't
room
have,
in your TFSA if
you would
wanted
need to have
put
the
it.
room.
Yeah.
You've already
Yeah.
maxed. So
Yeah.
that one exception to that rule, which is very powerful, if you've both maximized or whatever amount you've done, all that value can go into the surviving partner's TFSA as a successor holder and compound tax-free. Also creates maybe some skirring of activity. And this sounds a little bit morose, but the fact is, if you've got a partner, you're older, maybe health isn't great, and you haven't maximized in your tax-free savings opportunities, there's kind of that the 11th hour skirring of activity, which probably you should do, is you beg, borrow, and scratch to make sure that the partner that maybe is not doing well and maybe really struggling health-wise, get that tax-free savings account fully topped off. So when they pass away as a successor holder, all that money stays tax-free in a tax-free savings account that goes to the surviving partners. So they're little things. And I would say that this discussion point brings up the really important fact of, we say to clients every once in a while, maybe not every year, but every 5 years, take a look at all your account agreements, all the beneficiary designations. With tax-free savings accounts, it's likely to be a successor holder for your spouse. With RSP accounts, LIF accounts, is going to be a successor annuitant, right? So there's a difference between a successor annuitant on a RIF account to a beneficiary even, right? So there's these differences, and you need to walk through those differences with your financial advisor or financial institution to make sure they're lined up properly for you. But anyway, don't let this linger. Maybe double check to see whether the account agreement back in 2009 was set up properly.
So many terms. It's just, I can't imagine if I didn't work in this industry, if I didn't study this in school, I was coming into it and I was expected to make all these decisions. I would hate it. No wonder people don't like talking about money. Awesome. All right. Number 4, we're going to move on from the TFSA. Retirees and struggling with the retirement transition. Now, I think there's this false assumption that once you retire, you're finally free. Life is going to just be sunshine and rainbows. It's going to be margaritas on the beach. But fortunately, that's not the case. And I was actually just listening to a podcast today, and this, I don't know what he does exactly. He's some sort of behavioral psychologist or something, but he talks a lot about money and retirement. And the reality is we as humans almost need goals. And when we retire, often we had our passion, we had our purpose, and we retire, and then we don't really have any goals anymore. And goals don't just arise out of nowhere. They kind of need some intentionality. And so it can be a really tough transition, a lot more difficult than people often think. So I came across some statistics that are a little bit shocking. So since 2008, an estimated 10,000 baby boomers have turned retirement age, so 62 every day.
And by the way, this data is sort of amalgamation of North American data, so it includes U.S. data.
U.S. Yeah.
Yeah.
And by 2030, all boomers will be 65. Starting in 2027, the first of roughly 65 million Gen Zers will start hitting retirement age as well. But there's a real serious human side to it. So 76% of retirees say they've seen someone struggle with the transition. 43% say adjusting to retirement was a lot harder than they expected, and 45% said it took longer than expected to make that adjustment. Huge percentages. right? It's not a small amount of people struggling with it. A lot of people are walking into it unprepared. So, firstly, what do you think is driving this, and why aren't, I guess, you're not hearing a lot of people talk about this. I think it's not a fun conversation to have. So, why aren't more people talking about it?
I think you kind of nailed on, hit the nail on the head just now in your comment. The reason people don't talk, this is my thesis. I think the reason people don't talk about it is it would be embarrassing to admit that this event that you've been saving for decades to make this transition, you're not working for the man anymore. You've got your free time. You're pursuing your hobbies. And you are kind of living what's been portrayed as this amazing retirement transition. And you find out once you've gone through the honeymoon period, you're depressed. You're kind of aimless. You don't have a sense of purpose and meaning. You can't believe that you've got some anxiety and mild grade depression, and that's what the data is beginning to show. People just assume that the retirement planning piece, and we see this with the channel. If we post anything on health or the emotions or lifestyle, even this part of the podcast, we'll maybe see a drop off, right? What, you guys aren't talking about money? Like, I'm watching this stuff to learn about
Boring.
stuff, right? Boring, or
Boring.
right? Why do we want to talk about lifestyle and the
Yeah.
social, the sort of the soft facts of retirement? And yet it's hugely important, because what happens is no one's really training to get ready for that transition. And so there are three major things that happen to people that they do not take seriously. And if they're not planning in advance, it's going to come back and really hit them. Um, and so before I go over these three topics, the data, I'm part of a group that's really a retirement planning coaching association. And a lot of the work that we do through the association and the training modules is both the hard skills around financial planning and finances, but then the soft skills around trying to make sure that our clients are aware. And I can tell you that when I work with clients, there's no doubt over the last 3 decades, we have experienced every conceivable life event that a client and a family can go through. Every single year we experience them. Retirement, separation, divorce, the death of a partner, grandchildren arriving, marriages of kids, both amazing and horrible events. And as we walk beside those clients, helping them make financial decisions, every once in a while, they'll bring us into the emotional side. They can't help. When money changes, life changes. When life changes, money changes. And we see a little bit of that crack where the real person that we've been, don't always see the real raw aspects of their life coming through a little bit. And we try to be as supportive as we can, right? We're not therapists, we're not counselors, but in that moment, we can be empathetic and help them through very difficult transitions. And this retirement transition is the same thing. So the first thing is there is a social network cliff. 40% of pre-retirees expected that their social connections would actually increase in retirement. I don't know where they're getting that idea from, but that is not people's experience. 84% of retirees report a drop in social interaction once retired, with 40% of the respondents in the data reporting there was a drop of 50% or more of their relationship. For some reason, they just think that those relationships will continue in a post-work reality, and they don't. And so if they haven't gotten intentional around building new ones, it becomes very difficult. There's also what's called in the literature and the research, the honeymoon trap. The celebratory, carefree time new retirees experience. They've left work. It's like a long-term vacation for a while. And, it's awesome. But what happens is that 59% of pre-retirees expected it to last 3 to 6 months, this sort of transition period. And 50% of retirees stated that the honeymoon period was 12 months or longer. In other words, they were sort of in this transition that they weren't breaking out of. And it was just difficult for them to sort of begin navigating into the day-to-day sort of reality that actually brought purpose and meaning into their lives. We'll talk about that in a little bit. So the honeymoon trap is real. This carefree time that retirees experience after leaving work, and then taking the next step, which is, okay, how do I order my life, have a schedule, and meaning, building relationships, and then the last area is what we call the dark side of retirement, where retired people are twice as likely to report feeling symptoms of depression than those who are still working, and the possibility of suffering from clinical depression goes up by about 40% after retiring. So again, you talk about that glossy image of retirement, and
Yeah.
you get a lot of people struggling with, depression. And 25% of seniors age 60 and above report feeling isolated and lonely. And 43% can go days without talking to others and spend most of their time alone in their homes, in their residences. That's a lot of people. So I think when you hear this, you hope that I'm not going to be one of those statistics, but I think you do need to be a little bit intentional around how do you make sure you're not going to be a statistic. And so we talk about this a little bit in our channel with some of the video content, but like I said, it's funny. People don't seem to be very interested in it. They're more
Yeah.
interested in how I can make more money, in my retirement financial planning journey.
Yeah. Yeah. I think a big part of that too is I said this before, but the dopamine drop off, where dopamine is the pleasure of pursuit, right? And you've been pursuing things theoretically in your career. You're
Yeah.
retired. What are you pursuing? You're not getting any dopamine from anything. If you're not, by just like golfing every day, you're not I mean, you could just maybe try to become pro, in retirement. That's what I would do probably. Then you're pursuing something, but but you're not. You need something to like work towards. And I'm ripping this off the behavioral psychologist I was listening to earlier, but he was saying the same thing. Like you need that thing to like look at further down the line and move an inch closer to it, like any other goal. But it's hard. Yeah.
Well, it's one of the things we've talked about in past videos. It was really interesting. Ageism is a pervasive reality for retirees, and they're often surprised when they transition from, you're working, you're with peers, you're respected for your opinion, you're making contributions. Maybe you're in a leadership role, so people are deferring to you in terms of decision making. Can you imagine being in that role and then all of a sudden being in a role where nobody's asking your opinion anymore?
Yeah.
No one's seeking your advice. You're not giving direction and leadership. And what happens is it actually has a physical impact on us. So when you talk about depression, this sounds maybe like a little bit of a sexist comment, but obviously, for men particularly, first they don't talk about this stuff. They commiserate in isolation. They don't want to admit that they're struggling. Testosterone levels, right? And testosterone is for both men and women an important hormone, but for men, if you see testosterone levels going down, it leads to greater passivity, which means it compounds the problem we're talking about. They're not getting engaged, they're not contributing, they're not getting involved in organizations, they're beginning to hide at home and not getting engaged. And that has a vicious circle because as you are less and less engaged in the human system, physiology is dependent obviously on age and on your overall health, but it's also contextualized. We know for sure that, when people drive the race car drivers, people drive cars fast on a racetrack, their testosterone levels go up. When people play sports, their testosterone levels go up. So there are contextual things that we do. And if you can imagine where we're doing less of those things, we're less of in leadership roles, we're not pushing the envelope a little bit because now things are comfortable. And we're in an environment, where society is now ageist. It's ageism. They don't take you seriously. People look past you. They're not seeking your opinion. And it's this vicious cycle that in order to combat it, you've got to be very intentional. I challenge you. You ask any senior what their experience has been when they retire and as they get older, having experiences when they're interacting with people and people just look past them. They start feeling like they're invisible. And if that's your experience, you better have a way of counterbalancing that to maintain your overall physical and mental and emotional health. And I
Such a
don't mean
big
to preach
role.
too much.
Yeah. But I totally agree. It's such an important role for like elders, right? To kind of, they have all this experience, all this life experience. And it's not time to check out. It's kind of time to get involved, right? Because you've all the experience.
Yeah.
Easier
Yeah.
said than done. What do I know? But
So don't look past me, Josh.
yeah, exactly. All right. Well, that's pretty much all the topics we had for this episode. Unless there's something else another rant you wanted to hit off.
Yeah, no, I've got no more rants for this podcast, but I'm sure we'll
We'll do
find
another one.
some for the next one.
Awesome. All right. Well, if this prompted any questions or topic ideas, make sure you comment them down below. And we just appreciate you guys watching all the way through if you made it this far. And we will catch you in the next episode. Take care.